welcome to Decision Day 2019, boys and girls. And today I am doing part one of what would be a two-part preview, where this preview is going to be literally the same thing as the preview that I'd done in the previous week, which I look at the Eastern Conference matchup in part one, and I look at the Western Conference matchup in part two. The only difference is that this is Decision Day, and that this is the last game of the season, and this is where it's going to decide for either teams that is in the playoffs and where the seeding is going to be, or for those teams that is still on the bubble in terms of making the playoffs or not. And I think that's going to be tomorrow's video, because so far in the Eastern Conference, everything has pretty much set up, and that, you know, every team's know exactly whether or not if they are eliminated or going to the playoffs, and that for those teams that have clinched their playoff spots, well, it's all about the seeding now, and they're still trying to decide whether or not if they are going to get at least a game of a home field advantage in the playoffs, or maybe even 2 games of a home field advantage in the playoffs. But we start off the first game talking about Atlanta taking on New England. Now, Atlanta is currently 17-4-12, while New England is 11-12-10. Playoff implication in this game, Atlanta is currently tied for second with the Union, and as much as I talk about how first position is obviously an important position because you get the first round bye, I think the second place position is just as important as the first place position. Although the second place position does not give you a first round bye, at least it guarantees you to have at least 2 home games in the playoffs. And in case if the team at the top of the Eastern Conference fall, then Atlanta United will be the next team in line in terms of hosting a conference final game. And, you know, for New England, their playoff implication is that they can still climb as high as 5th place. Although, actually, technically, I would say they can climb as high as 6th place, because while they're 3 points behind the Red Bulls in this game, I don't think they have any chance of catching the Red Bulls, because the Red Bulls has more wins than New England has. And the first tiebreaker in MLS, actually, you know, before I move on to talk about other games, let me just kind of explain the tiebreaker rule in a bit, and I'll probably explain again in tomorrow's video when I do the preview for the Western Conference clash on deadline day. So the tiebreaker rule in MLS is basically the first tiebreaker is wins, and that the team that has the most win will get the first tiebreaker. The second tiebreaker is goal differential, so the team, of course, getting the higher goal differential will get that tiebreaker. And the third tiebreaker, I believe that's goal scored by each team. So if a team score more goals than the other team, when we go to a third tiebreaker, then that team, of course, goes on and win the tiebreaker. And the fourth tiebreaker is basically head-to-head battle. So it's kind of similar in terms of the tiebreaker that you see in most league in the world. The only big difference is that usually the first tiebreaker, when you look at some of those big league in Europe, is usually goal differential. In MLS, that is not the case. It is wins that is the first tiebreaker, and I guess the reason why that is the first tiebreaker is because Americans value wins more than actually your whole goal differential kind of stuff. And I actually like the fact that wins, of course, is the first tiebreaker. I mean, especially as a Quakes fan, I remember what happened in 2017 when we literally got into the playoffs because we had more wins than Dallas, and I believe we were tied on points, and that despite the fact that we had a minus 24 or 23 goal differential, and Dallas had like something like a 1 or plus 2 goal differential, and then in any other league, Dallas would not be missing the playoffs. They would have made the playoffs. And obviously, I heard a lot of people complain the fact that, oh, a team that has a minus 23 goal differential should not be made it to the playoffs. But, you know, they should, because they had more wins than the opponent. And at the end of the day, you know, in the playoffs, it's all about wins, pretty much. I mean, if you have more wins than your opponent has, then you should deserve more to be going into the playoffs than the team that has less win than you have. So I do like the fact that the tiebreaker is a little bit different from other leagues, and that the first tiebreaker is wins, which that's why New England is not going to get that 5th position because the Red Bulls actually had 3 more wins than what New England has so far this season. And it doesn't help the fact that New England had drawn a lot of games this season. Like, they are probably the draw king of MLS in terms of I actually don't know who exactly has the most draw, but I believe they're one of those top 3 teams in terms of the most draw that they have this season. So they can climb as high as 6th place, as they're currently 2 points behind TFC, and that if TFC does lose their game against Columbus and they win against Atlanta, then they of course would climb up in 6th spot. But either way, I think this game means more for Atlanta because they want to get to 2nd and that they can at least host 2 home games at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And playing home games in the playoffs is very important for Atlanta United, mainly because they just don't do well on the road. Like, this season, I think they only have won 3 games on the road, which is absolutely a disaster. I mean, the only reason why this team is not considered the top team in the Eastern Conference is that the loss that they have suffered on the road. And have they not lost so many games on the road, they probably could have finished top spot in the Eastern Conference and would have had a first round bye. And the other big question about this game is that whether or not if Josef Martinez is going to play in this game. Obviously, I talk about in the news of the week how he is back in training and that there is speculation that he could be playing in this game. But for me, I think that's just a speculation, and that I'll be shocked if Josef Martinez play in this game, mainly because it's only been 10 days ever since he suffered that injury. Like, that, there's no way in the world he could be starting a game after he basically just got carted off and looked like he was suffering a serious injury and a season-ending leg injury. And then 10 days later, he would be starting this game. And would you also risk him potentially re-injure his leg come playoff time? Because if you re-injure him and that you're not going to have him during playoff time, this could be a huge problem for Atlanta, because we've seen so far that when Atlanta does not have Josef Martinez, they look like a mediocre and not really a playoff team whatsoever. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is DC and FC Cincinnati. So, DC, of course, they are the team that has the most playoff implication in this game because, they clinched the playoffs and FC Cincinnati didn't. In fact, FC Cincinnati was long eliminated from the playoffs. But one thing that FC Cincinnati has done in the past couple of weeks is that they have took on that spoiler role. And that they have really spoiled a couple of teams' chances either making the playoffs or getting a chance to get a higher seed in the playoffs. And they have a chance to do it again against DC United, who currently is sitting at the 4th spot and clinch a home playoff game with a win. DC, of course, is 1 point ahead of the Red Bulls and 2 points behind TFC. And as I mentioned, FC Cincinnati is eliminated from the playoffs. And DC obviously are heading into this game on a pretty hot streak. They haven't lost a game in 4 matches, and that you think that they have finally found that rhythm that they can, of course, take heading into the playoffs, and that if there is a time to get hot, this is the time to do it when you're heading into the playoffs and that you are on a good kind of winning streak to basically potentially play a team that might not be in a good winning streak. But like I said, FC Cincinnati is a team that has spoiled a lot of teams' chances of either making the playoffs or the fact that they get a higher seed. So don't be surprised if FC Cincinnati might pull a shock in this game. Although this game is on the road against DC, and that Cincinnati this season has not been doing very well on the road. I mean, they haven't been doing well on the road or at home, but we shall see how this game, of course, would turn out. But moving on into the next match is the Red Bulls and Montreal. So, last week when the Red Bulls and DC, of course, play each other in the Atlantic Cup, I thought that was a match that could really decide who exactly is going to get that last spot in terms of at least hosting one home playoff game. Well, it turns out this week might be the case, and I think you could also say that whoever is able to beat their bad team is able to get home field advantage, and that, the Red Bulls are playing against a Montreal team that is definitely not a good team. They're not as bad as I would say FC Cincinnati, but they're not a good team, and that they're already looking toward the off season as they were eliminated last week from the playoffs. While the Red Bulls, of course, like I said, they're 1 point behind DC for place, and that they're also 1 point ahead of TFC and 3 point ahead of New England. So there's still a possibility that they could potentially drop to 6th place. But yeah, if they can, of course, get a win against Montreal and somehow DC, of course, drop points against FC Cincinnati, then maybe they could potentially get a home playoff game at Red Bull Arena. And if I also look in the standing right now, which I can't believe I forgot to pull up the standings again, but I believe if the Red Bulls does draw in this game, and if we're going to have a situation where both of these teams gets the tiebreaker, I think the Red Bulls currently has the tiebreaker because they have more wins than what what DC United has had this season, as I'm gonna pull it up right now. And the answer to that is yes. The Red Bulls does have more wins than DC had. So if DC lose their game and the Red Bulls draw against Montreal, and that both team ends up to be at 49 points, then there is definitely a chance. Well, there's going to be the case where the Red Bulls will host a playoff game, and they might potentially facing against DC United again, because if both of these teams are going to be the 4th and 5th seed, and that if the playoffs did start today, they of course would be playing against each other. And it also depends on if TFC does win their game. I think that if TFC does win their game, they of course propelled themselves all the way to I believe they propelled themselves all the way to 50 points, and then that's when they of course get a home field advantage, and then they will of course leapfrog both of these teams. So technically for the Red Bulls, even a tie in this game and a DC loss doesn't actually guarantee themselves a home playoff game. They also gotta hope that TFC either lose or draw their game, so that even if they do drop points against Montreal on the road, they can still of course host a home playoff game despite dropping points. But moving on into the next match is probably the match that I'm pretty sure nobody really cares about and nobody is going to watch, because this is probably the only match during Decision Day that there is literally nothing to play for both of these teams. And it's such a shame too, because a couple of weeks ago I said that this matchup was potentially the decider in terms of who makes it into the playoffs and who is going to be out of the playoffs. And that, I thought New England, with them kind of struggling for a bit, I thought they would really kind of go into a dogfight with Orlando and Chicago, and that, if New England is struggling and that they might lose to Atlanta, then might be the game that of course would decide who makes the 7th seed in the Eastern Conference. It turns out that was not the case, because New England was able to get back to winning ways, and yeah, that's why you end up in a game where there is really nothing to play for, and that both team is eliminated from playoff contention. And yeah, I mean, it's basically pride for both of these teams that's playing, and maybe also kind of just job security for some of these players that definitely want to make a good lasting impression for their head coach heading into next season. But again, this is probably one of the most meaningless games so far. The only meaningless game in Decision Day, because I'm pretty sure every single other game on Decision Day at least have one team that has a lot to play for heading into the final day. And hence, that's why it's called Decision Day, because this is when decision is going to be made. But moving on into the next match. So from a game that is completely meaningless and completely kind of an irrelevant game, to a game that you would say that this might be one of the marquee matchup on Decision Day, because the Union is playing against NYCFC in this game, and technically I could say that this is the battle at the top of the Eastern Conference, because it's between NYCFC, who currently is at the top of the Eastern Conference, and Philly, who is currently tied with Atlanta in the second in the Eastern Conference. The only problem with that is that NYCFC have already clinched their first position due to the fact that Philly wasn't able to get a draw or a win against Columbus last week, and that they basically have nothing to play for in this game. Now, Philly, on the other hand, they have something to play for in this game, and as I mentioned, with Atlanta trying to get that second position, the Union, they also want to get that second position, and I believe right now Atlanta has the tiebreaker if after what happened in decision day between both of these matches, and that if both of these teams does win their respective matches, then Atlanta, of course, would be getting that second seed because they have more wins than the Union has. And, you could also say that I think Atlanta does have a much bigger advantage of getting that second seed on decision day than Philly has because, Philly is playing against the best team in the league. Although, I will also say this, the Union does have an advantage, the fact that, they're playing against the top team in the Eastern Conference that basically have nothing to play for, and that I'm pretty sure Domai Turan is going to try to play a couple of the reserve player, and that, Philly might be able to get all 3 points in this game, and that really brings a lot of pressure on Atlanta, the fact that they have to win this game, potentially without Joseph Martinez against a New England team that still technically has something to play for if they can get that 6th seed and potentially improve their chances of winning and moving on into the next round of the playoffs. So we shall see who exactly is going to get that elusive second place and who exactly is going to at least host 2 home playoff game and the next in line in terms of hosting the conference final game, which now brings us to the last game of this week. And the last week, or not the last game of this week, but the last game of the Eastern Conference clash on decision day is TFC versus Columbus. So Columbus, obviously, they have nothing to play for because they're eliminated from playoff contention, but the way that they've been playing lately, it doesn't feel like they've been eliminated from playoff contention, in that it feels like they're still pretending the fact that they're still in the playoff race and that they are still kind of winning games like crazy, which, in some way that's good, the fact that they are not giving up late in the season, but at the same time, it has to be very disappointing if you're a Columbus Crew fan that now is finally the time the team started to get going, but unfortunately, it's too late in terms of trying to get back into the playoff race and ultimately eliminated from the playoffs. Now, they play against a TFC side that is currently 2 points behind DC for 4th place and 2 points ahead of New England for 7th place, and that, this is definitely a big game for TFC, knowing the fact that they could potentially have a situation where they could either host a playoff game if they, of course, is able to win against Columbus, and depending on if these two resort between DC United versus FC Cincinnati and the Red Bulls and Montreal is going to be a loss, and that they, of course, would be able to be the only team to win between that battle between 4th place, between those 4th and 5th and 6th place, or the fact that this could be a disaster for them and that they could drop all the way down to the 7th seed, and that most likely they're going to either play against the Union or Atlanta United in terms of the playoff game. Now, if that is the case, I'm actually very interested to see what's going to happen with, Atlanta or Philly play against TFC, because, TFC, this is a team that I think you could definitely make the argument that they could make a deep run in terms of the playoffs, because they do have some very good kind of talented player on their attack and also on the defensive end. But at the same time, you can also make an argument of why they're not going to make a deep run is because in critical moment, when they need to deliver and when they need that clutch goal to basically win a game, they haven't delivered even in this unbeaten streak that they have been on. So, yeah, I mean, it's very kind of interesting to see what exactly TFC would do in the playoffs, and that, I'm pretty sure if they do get a home playoff game, that might increase their chances of potentially go on a deep run, although this season TFC hasn't been that spectacular at home as they've done in previous seasons. So, yeah, I'm very interesting to see what TFC is going to do in the playoffs. And I know, obviously, I'm going to be interested to see where they're going to finish and they're going to be playing. Either they're going to play their first round on the road or they're going to be hosting a playoff game in the first round. But I'm just interested to see, can this team make a deep run? I mean, when you have guys like Pozuelo, Altidore, Bradley, and all those kind of talented players on your team, you would think that this team should be able to make a deep run. But the question is that going to be the case? Can they finally come through in clutch moment that they just haven't done it in the last couple of weeks? But either way, guys, hope you guys enjoy this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. As usual, make sure you guys leave your comments below your prediction in terms of all these decision day game and what kind of matchup you want to see in the playoffs, because you know, with the Eastern Conference all set in terms of teams that's going to be in the playoffs, and that it's all just the seeding that is left to play in this game, what kind of matchup do you want to see by the end of decision day, and that we will know who is playing who in the first round of the playoffs? But let me know in the comments below. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Tomorrow I will be doing the part 2 of the Decision Day preview, where I look at all 6 of the Western Conference clash, including the game that I am going to be keeping my eyes on pretty much the whole day. I mean, the problem with Decision Day is that since all these games kicks off at exactly the same time, I won't be able to really kind of watch many of these games. But since this year, where one of my team, the San Jose Earthquakes, is involving a game where if they, of course, win, they, of course, would be going to the playoffs, and that if they lose, they'll be out of the playoffs. That is a game that I'm going to be watching pretty much throughout the day, and that the only time when I do get updates in terms of these games is that when they, of course, gave updates of what is going on around the league. And maybe I can also put off the whip around on my phone, as I heard that they're planning to do kind of like a whip around where they're going to look at each of the game and kind of do a little coverage of what's going on in each of these games, and also talk about updates in terms of the standings and who exactly is going to make the playoffs, who exactly isn't, and also what is going to be the matchup as things stands. But that, of course, is going to be something I'll talk a little bit more tomorrow, and that, again, I'm going to be looking at the Western Conference clash tomorrow on my Decision Day preview part 2. But either way, hope you guys enjoy this video, and I will see you guys next time.